Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for having me. Um, I have prepared a film cue that I've kind of reimagined not too long ago. Um, I wanted to reuse this one to kind of show you the template that I'm using, and also kind of go through the music that I've written for this and show you how I've done this and put this together, and how this um, um, kind of project would work basically. So let me just share this screen first with you. Okay. I hope you can all see everything. If not, please let me know in the chat. So yeah, as I said, it's kind of a cue that I've actually used for a film called The Haunted that has kind of just been announced, but I've kind of wanted to reimagine everything and put a kind of different storyline to this. So I just prepared a little summary here. So this is about a lonely, forgotten war hero whose deeds are hardly known, trying to rekindle his relationship with his daughter, whom he had to leave behind to follow his calling in the army. However, he is now terminally ill and there may not be much more time left to do so. She's willing to give him another chance and visits him in his house, going through some of his pictures and seeing a bit of his past and his life for the first time. And the director's notes would be to write emotive, bringing his and her world together, as she felt abandoned by him, but others actually saw him as a hero. So he wanted to have a bit of a tone of honor in there, but it's overshadowed by the feeling of sadness. So it's not an ideal scenario for either of them. So we're trying to keep everything sort of bittersweet. And firstly, I just thought we're going to look at this session and the layout of everything before we go ahead. So I work in Logic most of the time, especially when writing with samples. But if I record, sometimes I go into Pro Tools. But for this, I'll be in Logic mostly. And whatever DAW you're using, I suppose there's always kind of a few things that you want to check or make sure it kind of is in sync with the project. So a few things to check is, for example, when I get the clip, I want to make sure that this is in the right frames per second. So if I load that one, go to the clip, I can just go to the info and it will tell me that it is encoded the frames per second as 24. So when I then go into my session and I load it here within Movie, Logic will usually automatically ask me if I want to change it to the setting of the clip that I'm loading in. So I think standard is 25 frames per second, but I just say yes, I want to change that to 24 frames per second. Also, it's going to ask me whether I want to extract the audio from this clip, to which I say yes, because I want to make sure that I can sort of mute it throughout or solo it out and have it as a separate channel, which I have, for example, here as my first track. Then usually I just make sure I usually work in a sample rate 48. But you can also double check that with the person you're in contact with. And quite often within the clip itself, especially for the film that we would have had for this one, there's an embedded time code as well. So I don't have it here, but if you don't have it, you can always ask for it, meaning it's just a way to make sure that this syncs up with your session. So I have the time code over here, and then usually it can be printed across the bottom of the clip as well. And when I have that, everything loaded in, another thing to check is maybe to go towards the end and see whether everything still lines up. So I'm just making sure.
Okay.
The dialogue is still in sync over here. So then the template that I have over here, I've mostly used, if we look at instrumentation itself, I mostly used BBC Symphony Orchestra Discover for this one. And if we have a quick look through it, it's kind of an all-in-one library that gives you the string section, brass, woodwinds, and percussion. Then over here is a nice layout that kind of indicates where traditionally the instruments would sit. So this can come in really handy. And then the two faders that we have here on the left, for example, is the expression fader, which is CC11. And then on the right-hand side, this is the dynamics fader. And we always try to stress to kind of use these as much as possible, especially with the lungs of the instruments. It's just a tool to give you to really breathe life into the writing and into the programming. So for example, if I'm using a, one second. If I'm just getting a violin lungs up, solo that too. Just really helps you to bring in these different dynamics. And to give a, just to cover quickly, that expression usually acts like a volume fader. So for example, if I was to turn this down, this is the reverb, make it quite dry, you can hear that the sound will cut off immediately. A bit jumpy. Whilst the dynamic fader gives you more the range of the from pianissimo to fortissimo in various degrees. So this will actually crossfade between the different dynamics of how hard the bow, for example, would be pressed against the string. And then this dial over here gives you reverb, so you can just give a little bit of the reverb that has been recorded, for example, of the room this was in. For this particular one, we've recorded this one in Maida Vale in the studios. And on the right-hand side over here, you have the different articulations that this library offers. So this pretty much kind of just covers the layout of what this library mostly does. Then for the template itself, I've just loaded all the instruments as they would be laid out traditionally on a score. So with, again, with the woodwinds at the top, then the brass section, then I have keys over here as well, and percussion, and the strings down here. What I've used, the only other library that I've used is from Labs, from the Labs range that we have with Spitfire Audio. If you haven't checked these one out, I think it's really worth looking at these because they're all for free to download, and there's some really, really lovely sample libraries within there. For example, this piano, which I kind of go to fairly frequently. The benefit of actually having this template and having it all organized is the way I do this when I have a new project, especially if it's a longer one and I want to work for the various cues in different sessions. I can just load always the same template and I know where I'm at and have sort of a system to kind of keep order, which can be quite important if you have to work fairly quickly. What I then usually do is also move the beginning rather than starting from bar 1. I usually start from bar 5, and I can do that by, I'm just gonna move this back for now just to show you quickly. simply go to tempo over here, tempo position, double click on the bar position, type in 5, and then it moves automatically there, and that's then locked for me over here as well. Just a reason for if I wanted to play it live at some point, it gives 2 bars for the conductor, and also it just gives the MIDI sort of to kind of get started, so kind of make sure everything is running as it should. Then typically not having any music at first, I just watch back the clip, and I will try to take a note whilst I watch it back as well, just to make sure I've got sort of hit points that I want to get to, or have some sort of a framework, frame to work to as well. So sometimes for this particular project, when we were working on the Haunted film, where this clip is actually from, we'd have at the very beginning of the project a spotting session, which is basically where we would sit together with the director and watch the whole film through, and then he would stop every now and then to, or throughout the whole film, to just make sure that he gives all the notes where he imagined to have what sort of music in there. Sometimes he talks more in feelings and kind of ideas, and we'll just make sure to kind of make sure to write down all the time codes where he had these ideas in mind. For this particular scene, if he, for example, just said he wanted to have it as we just read out in the brief that you saw over here, I just want to make sure that I have these kind of frameworks, this frame to work to. So let's just watch this through without any music and see what's happening in there. So the focus is on him first.
That should be better.
He has a very soft attitude towards him. There's a heavy breath, and then she shifts her focus over to the mental piece. So here he sees a little bit of his past for the first time.
Handsome guy.
She comes out of this moment and then focuses back on him.
It must be so lonely here. Life can be unfair, can't it? Yeah, I know. Okay. It's all right.
Right, little abrupt cut here, but we got plenty to work on before that. I'm just going to minimize it a little bit. Put it in a corner. All right, so what I've done first is I've taken notes throughout this and then kind of added some of these over by the markers over here. Then I usually like to start, not always, but sometimes I like to start with the piano and sort of play along to it and see what I come up with. So after a lot of having lots of parts that ended up in a bin, I actually stuck with this part over here. So I wanted to start very gentle, especially with the piano. It's not a very fast-paced scene. Everything moves really slowly. And I also have to establish the tempo throughout. So what I'm trying to do to figure out what tempo this might be is try and find little moments within the film, the clip as well, that gives me sort of a natural pace to everything happening in there. So this seemed like at around 116 seemed like a good tempo for me that I went for. So you can see I've already written everything, but I'll just go through each instrument kind of one by one, the way I've kind of built everything, and show you what I've done here. So this is the piano line that I started with.
That should be better. Handsome guy.
All right, I'm going to break that up into two halves and start with the first half. And so you can see there's not much movement going on within there, slowly developing as she discovers sort of more and more about him. So there's a slow bit of intensity, and it's kind of reflective of that. But now that I have put this down, there was a moment, especially around here, where she's kind of breathing heavily. So kind of wanted to breathe with her and give that a little break, have a little slowdown here. So just to keep everything on the grid, I just had a tempo change over there. And something to keep in mind is that you want to move forward with the tempo changes rather than backwards, because if you obviously change anything here, that will change the layout against the video further on. I'm using a pedal note for the piano, and it's mostly going back between like an F sus2 and an A flat major 7th, and then sort of moves on to a B flat sus2 and then C and 5th. And once I had this sort of down, I could now build up from there. So the next thing I did was go over to the woodwind section and included some flutes. Again, trying to build very softly throughout. And then one by one, I want to add more instruments to it. And rather than using the same instrument, for example, I want to make sure I've got all these nice textures. So by using the oboe and the piccolo, for example, it just allows you to create a really lovely fuller tone as well at the same time. And as you notice, there's this little break just before she goes and makes the move over to the mental piece. So it's kind of giving her this time to have this breath and then move over to the other side of the room. I then added some piccolo as well. And then also some clarinets. I then also introduced some brass because I kind of wanted to bring in both worlds, and I reserved the brass section more for him and his sort of heroic kind of theme, being a war hero and being seen as such. So slowly I'm also introducing some horns. Together with some tenor horns over there, and trombones. And as she's sort of walking over there to this image, I wanted to, for everything to kind of come up a little bit and then all the way down again when she actually walks to the picture, because I think it just gives it a little bit more focus. So I also have some strings to tie everything up together. Let me just add those two. So here you can notice she's now about to grab the picture, and I wanted to make this more of a moment. So I brought everything down to focus on that point.
Homay, this is Christina. I'm going to jump in with a quick question from the chat from someone who missed the beginning. Can you speak to how you're orchestrating the different instruments within Logic, or creating them separately? I think if you can show us the library that you're using again, that would be great.
Absolutely. So usually I just, for this one in particular, I've written already everything here, but I'm just going through each instrument one by one and adding them, so you can actually hear how I've built this cue. So the first one was the piano that I started with, which is from a labs library and looks like this. And then I moved on to the flutes over here. So it comes within within the BBC Symphony Orchestra library. It's called Discover, and just loaded the different instruments basically, and kind of edit them one by one. So as I said, starting with the piano, then I would go over to the flutes, do a line, and then add instrument by instrument within the template that I have laid out within here. I hope that answered the question.
Awesome, thank you.
So yeah, I'm just trying to sort of follow my ear and also the chords that I've already put down with the piano. And I then sort of go to the instruments that I have loaded up and try to add them sort of one by one and create slowly, step by step, the cue and try to write the music like that. Sometimes I would write sort of this little bit of chunk that I've just explained now, and then I move on to the next section. So for me, I've just made sure that I wanted to, for example, work to the frame that I've laid out with the markers that I have up here as well. So for me, I sort of created a moment for this scene up until now. And then I see how she would kind of move on next. As we've already seen, she's kind of going through the pictures, and it's a big moment for her to see a little bit of his past. And obviously this would be an incredibly big moment for him as well, to finally meet her daughter. So but it's quite tragic, but just because of the circumstances. And I wanted to put these two worlds together, with the softer parts being the kind of sadder side of things, and then the brass section still bringing a tone of sort of his point of view, or his life that he had, where he is this sort of seen as a hero. So I'm trying to bring both sides in and out as much as possible. Especially as she's now going through, we are looking at him being sort of this well-respected man. So I can then go through again. So having the piano here, I would then again look into the woodwinds and see what I would play in from this point onwards.
Handsome guy.
And as I said, just highlighting that with some brass as well.
Handsome guy.
And sorry, I'll just add the rest of the woodwinds in here too, and show you what I have here in my piano roll. From here.
Handsome guy.
Again, I'm sort of coming in and out, and I wanted to make sure I'm coming out in time for her to say her line, to give her some space and kind of work around that too. So this is why you sort of hear me coming back out again. And then moving onwards. Again, I'm sort of just building up from the piano that I've already laid out throughout. And then at this time I came back with some more brass. Especially because at this point the shot was back on him. So there's definitely something I wanted to kind of push a little bit more with the brass section. And then one by one, I'm just adding more parts. So here I've got the tenor trombone. Trying to build in this more heroic theme. Some horns that are coming in here as well. And then also just keeping it kind of cohesive with the woodwinds as well. And again, as we're talking about sort of all these different textures, especially from the orchestra, I just wanted to also tie in the strings in here. I've got some pizzicatos and then also these longs over here.
Handsome guy.
Coming back quickly to these markers again, they kind of gave me a heads up to how long I'm keeping sort of these instruments in, and how long I keep the sections where I finish the section. So I'm making sure that at this point I'm slowly coming back out again, because for me there was a little bit of a pause there because she shifts her focus at this point again. So as you can hear, I'm just going to play this back one more time, where everything is just coming back down. Which kind of finishes the first half that I've broken it up into. So here is definitely a point where everything is coming out and there's a bit of a pause and a shifts focus on back onto him. At which point I am using the piano again to build up on that scene. So let's listen to what I put in here first.
Life can be a fair, can't it? Yeah, I know. Okay, okay. Shh. It's all right.
All right, so I have my foundation here and have sort of a feel what I want to go for. Again, that's kind of me searching around on the piano what I think would maybe fit underneath there. until I sort of find a tone that I think works really nicely according to the notes that was given from the director. And then there was kind of a little detail about when she has her line. So
Must be so lonely here.
I'm coming back in with a chord, but I wanted to make sure the chord, I'm just going to show you in the piano roll, over here, or with the left hand side, is coming in after she said her line. So I just slowed it down slightly so it make sure I'm out of the way of her dialogue.
So lonely here.
So this time I continued with some strings. Again, I'm just sort of building up from what I have so far.
Life can be a fair, can't it? Yeah, I know. Okay, okay.
Down here I have some pizzicato, just wanted to emphasize some of the bars and the one.
Life can be a fair, can't it? Yeah, I know.
Then the next part I laid on top of there was again with some horns.
Life can be a fair, can't it? Yeah, I know.
Double that up with a trumpet.
Yeah, I know.
And lastly, also bring back in the woodwind section. Have some flutes here as well.
Life can be a fair, can't it? Yeah, I know.
And just again, to show the faders that I've explained earlier about expression dynamics, I'm just trying to work as much sort of dynamics within there as possible.
Homay, it's Christina. I'm just going to do a little time check. We've got about 15 minutes left. Got a lot of great questions, so let us know when you're ready for us to send them your way.
Okay, amazing. I mean, this is basically it. So this is, if we put everything smaller again, this was basically the rest of the, what I've written to this cue. And I just wanted to kind of come down again at the very end.
Okay, okay. Shh. It's all right.
And usually once I've written everything, I bounce it out to the cue itself. And usually I wait until I have specifically for this project. There was a few cues that I accumulated first that I've written the music to. zipped it all up and then send it to the director for him to give me feedback on whether he thinks, don't use any of this, use part of this. I like, give me some notes, what he likes, what he doesn't like within there. And this is a very good point, good point to kind of keep a good folder structure for all the different versions that you might have to write for specific cues. And yeah, so this is basically was a way that I written music for this cue and how I build it all up. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them as best as I can.
Thank you so much, Homay. There's so much appreciation going on in the chat, how cool it is to see your session and to see the process and all of the layers that come together to have this really emotional moment in this film. So thank you so much for breaking down it step by step and us see how it builds up that real feeling of the scene. We have some really great questions, and some of them are on the technical side, and then I'd love to ask you a few questions just about your journey. I know a lot of folks here are interested in composing or maybe are composing themselves and would love to hear a little bit about that. But I'll jump into some from the chat. Can you tell us what your signal chain is in the mix window and what your mixing process is?
All right, so this one is actually a session that the way it's routed is so that in case I did want to have everything, let me just see, I've hidden quite a few tracks. I just laid out the whole orchestra there, or it's a template of the whole orchestra as well. And it's kind of laid out in a way that you can write for it. And then if you needed to do all the stems for the various parts, which are quite often split into longs, shorts, effects, for example, and they can be printed straight onto within the session by just playing it back. So it kind of is an easy way to kind of keep an eye on how you have everything. To be honest, I have there is you can go really deep within this template, but there is a link. I can share this template with you, and there's also a link done to a YouTube video of Christian Henson, who's created this beautiful template and explains everything really, really nicely. If you wanted to really know how everything is specifically routed. I can make sure that we're passing on all the details for that. Equally with the clip itself, happy to pass that on as well if people wanted to try and score to that themselves.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Another question that came in is sort of about your composition process. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you write to sheet music first, or do you go straight to the keyboard? Tell us a little bit about your process.
So I go straight into Logic, and then I will write with samples straight away. For things like this, or I sit down at a piano. I can sometimes start in various places, actually, depending on the project. I like to start on the piano, but I also it's not a rule. I sometimes just go straight into different instruments, straight onto strings or synth sounds if this is what is asked for. So it can really start from different places, which is quite nice, kind of gives you a different mindset. If I start always from the same place, I kind of tend to go to, where the hand falls in a way. So using different starting points kind of helps with getting different things out. Awesome, thank you. Speaking of your keyboard, one person in the chat wanted to know a little bit about your gear. They say that it does a really good job of not sounding too keyboardy when you're playing other instruments. And I see that you have a beautiful setup behind you. So if you could tell our chat members here what is in your setup and maybe what is your favorite piece of gear. Oh, yeah, so I'm using a Doppler keyboard. Feels very nice. but it works well for this. Since I'm not programming classical piano concertos, it does the trick. And behind me, I have a Prophet Rev 2 that I like to use for other projects sometimes, and also very much love the Grandmother Moog over here. For the setup right here as well, I'm just using a Blackmagic dock for the drives. I don't know if you can see it. I'm trying to see just down here. I'm using with SSD cards, especially for the samples that I'm using. They can be quite big, so they work really nicely and fairly quickly, especially loading slightly bigger sessions. And I'm using an Apollo 8P as my interface, and then for the, I can show that. I actually got that glued onto my desk, but I can quickly rip it off. For the faders that I've been saying earlier, I'm using a Nano Control Cork 2. Yeah. So, and then I kind of just, you can download the Nano Control 2 editor, and then within the editor, you can actually program it. So it would, every time you open a new instrument, you can assign expression to be, sorry, you can assign for expression to be CC11, which is always this fader for me, and then CC1 for dynamics, which is the other fader for me. So rather than, let me just put up the GUI again. So by right-clicking, you can also assign faders, but I don't want to do that for each individual instrument. So it's easier if you just go into the editor and kind of do that there. So it kind of links up automatically. Yeah, what else am I using?
That's great. I think we're all very jealous of your setup. It looks fantastic. So to wrap up, I have two more questions, and we've got a lot of people interested in your personal journey and how you got into composing, what training you had, any advice for people that are looking to get into this kind of work, and just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are.
So if I start, I guess I started playing piano a little bit. I didn't know till quite late that music for media is something that I wanted to get into, maybe around, I think 18, 19 maybe. I always knew something to do with music, but I played in different bands first, as a keyboardist and also as a backing vocalist. So surrounded by musicians, which was nice. I came over to England when I was about 17 years old, partially because in England there's a course called music production, which at the time didn't even exist back in Vienna, where I went to school too. So this was something very exciting and new to me, and just seeing kind of the technical things for the first time, and actually opening up a whole new kind of way of thinking of what I could actually do. And this is where I sort of discovered, or actually started thinking about writing music to picture or for media. It was actually a task within class where we had to write music to an advert, and it was just a lot of fun, really. So I explored that route a little bit more so, and tried to sort of, any talking about it to other people, musician friends, and them doing projects, and them maybe wanting to have a string arrangement for their track. I sort of took that on, and started writing little string arrangements. I then, after having worked in a bar for quite a long time, I really was trying to look for a job within music, found one that kind of required a lot of transcription work. So that actually really helped me to find my way within music as well, because I'm not classically trained. but this gave me transcribing orchestral music was something that really helped me to find my way around it, or hear where instruments sort of sit. And at some point I found somebody was telling me about Spitfire audio, which I didn't know anything about samples or how to make them at all, but it was just, they were fairly small at the time, or a small team anyways, and friends of mine were kind of just suggesting to go check them out. They're doing cool things. So I just kind of went over there, knocked on the door and said if there's anything that I could do, and was I guess a kind of right place at the right time maybe. They luckily interviewed me, and I started off as working in support at Spitfire Audio, but they knew my interest in writing. So so my job basically within Spitfire Audio as one of the in-house composers is to write demos for whenever there's a new product coming out. There's also trailers, teasers, any sort of marketing, for example, that needs some music, or any sort of footage that may need some music underneath. And then also we do tutorial videos on that side, on the Spitfire YouTube side. And so I, yes, kind of slowly, there was more demand for writing more demos. So I kind of was asked to help out maybe a little bit, and it was apparently not too bad. So I slowly started writing more and more for Spitfire, but at the same time, there were some other projects coming in that I was doing, for example, The Haunted the Film, or I also do kind of remixes for other artists. I still do string arrangements for other artists quite often, here and there, an advert, and little projects that kind of come up.
We love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. We love to hear that, you know, so many of these journeys are not a straight line.
Definitely not.